Hans Zimmer said, be your own composer. Don't be a Zimmer copier. I've probably paraphrased that slightly, but this is one of the interesting snippets of information I discovered in his masterclass. Card up there, link in description. Now, my interpretation of this is find your own musical voice. Don't copy from me or anyone else. And I know a lot of composers give this a lot of thought and agonize over it. I have seen YouTube videos and blog posts which mention it and say how important it is to be, well, original. But how easy is it to be original? How easy is it to become your own composer? How easy is it to find your own musical voice? Well, I have 7 suggestions you might want to look at which might help you on your path to discovering your own compositional voice. Now, this is not just for film or media composers. This is for anyone who composes music of any kind, in any style and in any genre. Now, when I heard Hans say this in his masterclass, I immediately thought of a story I heard many years ago about another famous composer. Maybe you have heard this story. It's about a composer called George Gershwin. Now, I'm not sure if you need to be of a certain generation to know who George Gershwin was. He was a famous composer in the 1920s and 30s. Sadly, he died in 1937 at a rather early age. His most famous piece of music, probably, which I really hope you have heard, is Rhapsody in Blue. If you haven't heard it, there is a version on YouTube, and I shall leave a link to that in the description. He wrote many Broadway musicals, he wrote a lot of popular songs of the day, and one of his most famous songs, which you may have heard, is Summertime, and I think it is still being recorded by singers even to this day. And the story is, even though he was already a successful composer, he felt the need to expand his horizons, to learn more. So Gershwin went to Paris to study with Ravel. Now, I'm assuming you've heard of Ravel. His most famous piece is probably Ravel's Bolero, which was popularised in the film 10, starring Dudley Moore and Bo Derek. But after some initial discussion, Ravel said he couldn't teach him anything. And he said, why be a second-rate Ravel when you can be a first-rate Gershwin? So that's the story as I heard it. I'm sure Hans Zimmer heard the same story, and it's interesting that he says basically the same thing. Now, I don't think anyone emerges from the Royal College of Music or university after having studied music even for umpteen years with their own voice. If you look at just about any composer, you can usually see how their style has developed over time. You can certainly see this with classical composers if you look at some of their early works and then some of their later works. In the pop world, if you look at people like, shall we say, the Beatles, because they, I think, were fantastic songwriters. If you look at their early albums and see how their songwriting ability progressed up to Sgt. Pepper and the Magical Mystery Tour, then you can see how they have developed. Now, I don't think finding your own compositional voice necessarily means having a style that is immediately recognizable. Now, a lot of bands and singers have their own style, which I think is identifiable. But I think a lot of that is to do with the sound of the band or the sound of the singer's voice, not necessarily the composition. So this channel is about synthesizers and electronic music. So if we took a band like Kraftwerk, for example, I think a lot of their music is quite identifiable as Kraftwerk. Tangerine Dream, particularly the earlier albums, seem to have a Tangerine Dream style. Mark Knopfler has, I think, quite a distinctive guitar sound. Bob Dylan has a distinctive voice. You get the idea. Now, finding your own original voice seems to be quite a thing in film and media composition. Some forms of scoring are deemed now to be quite old-fashioned. Directors or producers seem to want a new thing, whatever that may be. And there seems to be a bit of pressure on composers to be new and original. Now, having said that, I don't think that necessarily means writing in one particular style. Christian Henson, you probably subscribe to his channel if you enjoy videos about composition. He scores for a British TV series called Inside Number 9, and every episode is different, and he says he really enjoys doing these series I think because each episode is so different. So he's not just writing in one particular style, he has the ability to write in many different styles to suit the different episodes. Now, I was wondering if Hans Zimmer had a particular style. I think he's a very, very clever composer. He's scored over 150 movies. I'm not familiar with all his music. So I asked ChatGPT if Hans Zimmer had a musical style, and this is what it said. Since it is a sort of AI, I thought it was fitting that an AI should voice the text.
Hans Zimmer is known for his large, epic, and emotional film scores that often feature orchestras, choirs, and electronic elements. He often uses themes and motifs that are repeated and developed throughout a score, creating a strong musical identity for the film. He also frequently employs unusual sound textures and experimental techniques to create a sense of atmosphere and tension. Some of his most recognizable musical signatures include the use of heavy percussion, such as taiko drums, and the incorporation of distinctive solo instruments, such as the cello and guitar. In general, Zimmer's music is characterized by its grand and sweeping nature, as well as its ability to evoke strong emotions and convey a sense of adventure and excitement. His scores often have a sense of timelessness and a sweeping, dramatic feel that is intended to enhance the visuals on the screen. Whether it's a dark and brooding score for a superhero film or a sweeping, romantic score for a historical epic, Zimmer's music is always memorable and impactful.
So from that, I would say he has certain trademarks, but I also think many of his scores are quite different from each other. Given a single cue or even half a dozen cues, I'm not sure you could actually say a certain piece of music was written by Hans Zimmer or another clever composer. So one thing I would say, and this is not one of the tips, don't stress too much about finding your own musical voice. I think versatility in whatever field you are working in, particularly film and media composition, is probably as important as having a distinctive style. That's just my opinion. So just before we get to the suggestions, if you are enjoying the video so far, perhaps you would like to consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell. Thank you, so you get informed of new videos as soon as I release them, and yes, do please click the big thumb because that helps as well. So here are my 7 tips for finding your compositional voice. The first one is very simple. If you think about it, you will probably know what it is. You may not like it, but the first one is practice. As with all skills and crafts, and composition is a lot of craft. It's not just sitting there waiting for the muse to strike. If you are a media composer, you do not have that luxury. You have to rely on craft as well as inspiration and creativity. And as with most things, the more you do something, the better you become. So I would say composing regularly, whatever it may be, would be the number one thing to help you develop a style and certainly develop your craft. Number 2, listen to a range of musical styles and genres. Now, I know it can be easy and tempting just to listen to one type of music, the type of music you want to compose in, the type of music which you are most interested in. Now, as a kid, I listened to all sorts of music. I was well into pop music, rock music, but I was also well into classical music as well. And a little bit later on, I got interested in jazz. If you listen to a variety of different musical styles, you might find that you actually enjoy them. And you might be able to pick up some hints and tips, some ideas along the way that you could perhaps incorporate into your own music. So I would say listen, see if there's anything you can pick up or take away from some different types of music and try incorporating that in your own compositions. So number 3 is related to number 2, and that is don't just listen to the music but analyze it. See how it is put together, see how the melodies develop, see how the harmonic progressions develop, see what sort of bass lines they use, see what sort of drums and rhythms they use. I've heard this sometimes described as a deep listening. Now, I know some composers get the scores to pieces of music they like and analyse them. They go through them in great detail. Now, you do need a certain amount of musical theory and knowledge to be able to do that, but you don't have to do it so deeply. You can listen to different sections of music and work out what makes the rhythm so interesting or the harmonic progression so interesting. And when you analyse something, I think you tend to absorb a lot of that information, so there's a good chance it will come out in a future composition in some way, shape or form. Number 4, try new things. Now, this isn't just about listening to different types of music, but try new sounds. Now, if you are a synthesist, that's pretty easy to do. But if you are more into orchestral compositions, for example, then try different instruments, or try adding a synthesizer sound to an orchestral composition, or try some ethnic instruments and see how they fit into a composition. You could also try new production techniques. Number 5, and this sort of relates to the last suggestion, find your own workflow. And I think this is incredibly important, because not only does it enable you to work faster and hopefully smarter, but you will develop a style of composition which is perfect for you. Now, there are dozens and dozens of videos on YouTube about compositional workflow. Now, by all means, look at these to get ideas and suggestions, but at the end of the day, you still need to find your own. Now, that might be starting with the beat, as many of these videos do, but it might be starting with the harmony first, or the melody first, or the bass line. It might be starting with a song title or a song idea. It might be using some other form of inspiration. It may be looking at an image, or of course, if you are scoring for film, then watching the movie. But I think it's very helpful if you can discover a process which helps you compose easier, better and faster. And this may take a little bit of experimentation, a bit of trial and error. Number 6, see if you can get feedback on your compositions from a trusted source. Now, if you've played any of your music to friends and family, hopefully they have been gushingly positive about it. That's what friends and family are for. Now, you may be lucky enough to have a friend who is a good friend and a nice friend who is also prepared to give you an honest assessment of your work. Working alone in a vacuum, as I think many of us musicians and composers do, can not only be lonely, but lack of feedback can make it difficult for you to analyse your own work. If you can't find anyone who is honest and still friendly enough to give you an honest appraisal of your work, the best suggestion, I think, is to put it away for a week or 2 weeks or possibly a month, and then come back to it and listen to it with fresh ears. You may be surprised and possibly upset at what you hear. And finally, tip number 7, practice. Have we said that? Well, that just goes to show how important I think this is. You will only find your own voice, your own style, by working at it, by composing, by doing. You can read books, you can watch videos, but you'll only get better, you will only develop by actually composing music. If you have any suggestions on how someone might develop their own compositional voice, then please do leave them in the comments. I'm sure they would be a big help to everyone. So I hope you found this interesting, useful, perhaps mildly entertaining. If you did enjoy this, then I think you might enjoy these videos as well. As always, thank you very much for watching. I will see you again in the next one.